Well, how do you feel about bailing out the people instead of the big banks? Well, that's what a spin-off of Occupy Wall Street is on a mission to do. It's called the Rolling Jubilee, and it's catching the attention of journalists and the finance sector. It's being both hailed and scrutinized. Here's the organization's explanation of it.
We shouldn't be forced into debt to cover basic needs like healthcare, housing, and education.
We need a jubilee, a clean slate, a cancellation of debts for the 99%.
Here's how we're going to do it. In America, banks sell debt on this shadowy market full of debt buyers. Debt collectors then turn around and try to extort the full amount from us.
That's where the Rolling Jubilee comes in. It raises money to buy the debt.
But instead of collecting on the debts we buy, we're going to abolish it. Poof. Shazam.
Wow!
The math is on our side. A little bit of money goes a long way.
If we can raise $50,000, we can buy $1 million worth of debt and abolish it.
If we raise more, we can abolish even more.
So as you just heard, the idea behind this Jubilee is to buy distressed debt for pennies on the dollar and then forgive it. It's kind of what the big banks do, except now it's a group of ordinary citizens buying and selling the debt, the bad debt, and then bailing out the people rather than banks dubbed too big to fail. For someone drowning in debt, a position millions of Americans are in, this sounds like a miracle. But is it all too good to be true? Joining me now here in D.C. is host of the Capitol Account, Lauren Lister, and in New York, RT correspondent Anastasia Churkina. Ladies, thanks to you both for joining me. So, Anastasia, I'm going to direct this first question to you. This Rolling Jubilee, as it's called, has gotten a lot of positive feedback, but still there is a blowback. Some people critical that this is going to be effective. Some, can you kind of describe some of the concerns that people have with this idea?
Sure, Liz. Well, as we all know, having covered the Occupy Wall Street movement since its inception, that one thing the movement never lacked was the critics and the haters surrounding it. And sometimes concern have gone from more or less legitimate to outright bogus. And certainly with the Rolling Jubilee idea, that is also the case. We have some people saying, well, we like the idea of what the Rolling Jubilee is about, but Occupy is still ridiculous, or something like that. And then there's also an array of more legitimate social, moral, and legal concerns. And one of the most popular ones is really the fact that people are saying that the way they're planning to do this is really a drop in a bucket and a band-aid on a huge problem in the system. Because as we know, of course, over 77% of American households and 1 in 7 Americans are hounded by debt collectors. The student debt bubble is at over $1 trillion, and the overall American consumerism indebtedness is estimated at over $11 trillion. And with this Rolling Jubilee program that's going on right now, they have already raised over $160,000, and they're estimating that this will abolish over $3 million in debt. And of course, this is a very small percentage of the debt that exists out there in this country. A little earlier today, we caught up with economist Max Wolf, who compared this to trying to eradicate homelessness. Take a listen to how he explained it.
You go home and you get all your friends together and you make a giant pot of macaroni, and you drive around and you give a whole bunch of people who you hope you haven't insulted because of their personal style, but who actually are homeless. You walk up to them and you give them a spoon and a bag of macaroni. Is that a good thing to do? Sure. Will it feed those people? Yes. Will they be happy? Yes. Does it end homelessness? Probably not.
Another major aspect of this that experts are questioning is, of course, the issue of taxes, because under the tax code that exists in the United States, a cancellation of debt is seen as an income. And this may seem kind of a little bit confusing to most people because the way this works is that even if your debt is canceled, that is still seen as money that you now are responsible for taxing. So, and more importantly, this is a dollar per dollar transaction. So certainly people, the concern here is that these people whose debt will be abolished and relieved might still have to pay taxes on that abolished debt. It's a very convoluted system.
And that is one of the criticisms in. I want to pull up this quote from Business Week. It states, kind of reiterates what you just said, Anastasia. A person's debt can't truly disappear with no consequences. The amount forgiven is technically income, that is cancellation of debt income in Internal Revenue Service terms. So, Lauren, are taxes inevitably the result of forgiving debt bought at pennies on the dollar?
Well, I mean, this is what Anastasia just talked about and what your the quote from that criticism was. And I mean, it goes back to the old saying, the things to be sure of in life are death and taxes. And in this case, debts that's forgiven are taxed. So is that argument that better to pay the taxes on it than have to pay that debt? I don't know. It could go either way, but it is one of those weird unintended consequences, which we see so often with so many things when we're talking about anything in the financial system. And this is actually something that I've heard other critics bring up in other kinds of programs that have been pitched in terms of student loan debt forgiveness programs. They go, oh, great, this is such an amazing program. Forgive these student loans of the debt, but they get stuck with a tax bill, these indebted students. So how much does that really help them if they still have this tax bill when they couldn't afford their student loans? So this is something that keeps coming up when we've heard these kind of pitches and programs for debt forgiveness. It's one of these weird aspects that, you know, it's a complex system, and there are always things that you aren't expecting or unintended consequences.
Right. It's not like you can just wipe it out and it just disappears. There are consequences to doing so.
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately not. Should that be changed? It sure seems so. If you're forgiving debt, I don't think should have to pay a tax bill on it.
Right, right. Another goal is to help folks that are struggling and drowning in debt. But the argument is, why is it more worthy to help those that are indebted, you know, and decided to take on this debt rather than helping those that are legitimately poor, that maybe don't have any debt? Is it more worthwhile to help these folks?
See, what I don't really understand why it has to be an either or. I mean, there are tons of groups that are trying to work for many issues that have arisen from the financial crisis and from the economy in general in this country. And whether it's Occupy or someone else, I think that they are aiming to help the poor, help over indebtedness, whatever. In terms of that argument, though, I think it gets to this issue of moral hazard. If you took out debt, you know, that's your problem. You knew what you were getting into, and you should, you know, have that bill that you have to pay and suffer the consequences of not being able to pay it. The only issue with this is that we have seen credit. First of all, it's how this economy, monetary system, which is debt-based, and by the nature of our consumer spending-based economy, where housing is so crucial and most people can't buy a house outright, they have to have a mortgage, and this is how Americans, many of them, have accumulated wealth, is by having that wealth in their house in terms of the middle class. So you kind of are getting to the fundamental way that our economy is built, and debt's such an important part of that. So it's kind of an issue of, okay, are you going to hate the player or are you going to hate the game? Because for so many Americans, too, we know that wages have been stagnant in this country for so long. So a way that Americans have made up for that is by using credit to pay for their needs because prices have continued to rise, even though wages have stagnated. So there's that issue. There's also that so many people see a college education as what's going to help them improve their situation so they can get jobs, especially when the economy is tough. So that sent more people back to school, taking out student loan debt. So there are some underlying structural things that need to be addressed, but this issue of debt is so ingrained that it's hard to make the more hazardous.
As you just explained there, that's kind of catch-22 situation where they're trying to better themselves. They end up taking out more debt to try to get a better education, and then they're stuck with more debt. Of course, unemployment rate remains high, so it kind of becomes this vicious cycle. Another argument there is that maybe people need to rethink the way maybe they shouldn't be taking out tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in college loans. Maybe they should think twice before buying that house that couldn't afford, because now we're seeing the effects of that. Well, something that's interesting about this scheme, I think, is that it kind of it mimics what the big banks are doing and what occupiers are protesting against, you know, bailing out the big banks and using the market to commodify debt. So, Anastasia, I want to ask you, is it hypocritical now to use the market as a solution? Now they're kind of taking the tactic of the big banks and using it to benefit, to kind of control the outcome, I guess.
Well, Well, Liz, I wouldn't necessarily say that this whole scheme per se mimics the way big banks operate because, what we're talking about here is obviously when corporate interests are involved, we're always talking about profits being made. And in this particular case, the Rolling Jubilee is in no way looking, in no shape or form is looking to make a profit. So when you have a debt buyer trying to hound money out of the debtors, they're obviously, when they do the same thing as Occupy Wall Street is doing by buying this distressed debt for pennies on the dollar, they're still obviously looking to make a profit. In the case of Occupy Wall Street, they're not doing this. So is it hypocritical? I wouldn't really necessarily say so because, yes, they're playing, by the market rules because they have to, because this is the way the system works. If you want to relieve somebody of distressed debt, this is really the way to do it because the only way to have the rights to decide what you're going to do with distressed debt is by buying it. And this is exactly what they're doing. So are they playing by the rules of the game? Absolutely. So, and if, what wouldn't be hypocritical in this case? What would they have to do to not make it hypocritical? They're basically doing whatever they can in terms of how the system works to help out as many people as they can.
And we should just mention, apparently on the website, it lists how much money they are raising, and it is now over $171,000. So they are raising a lot of money. People are interested, intrigued by this method. I want to ask you, Lauren, clearly debt is a problem in the U.S., whether it's student debt, credit card debt, trillions and trillions of dollars, and households carry too much debt these days. Well, getting rid of that debt, I mean, obviously it'll help the person that holds the debt, but could that also help the economy?
No, I don't think that it can. And here's why. The economy that we're living in, even post-recession and post-financial crisis, we're still looking for the same things to fuel an economic recovery. It's very much built on consumer spending, and that consumer spending is very much built on consumers taking out more and more debt, getting a mortgage to buy a house, going and buying a big screen TV, maybe taking out a credit card or putting some of it on a credit card to do that. So as long as that's what's fueling the economy, I mean, this is always going to be an issue that comes up again and again and again. So until you address that our economy is so built on consumer spending, and we haven't seen wages rise, we haven't seen incomes go up in order to afford more and more spending. Households are still deleveraging, paying down debt. The number that Anastasia cited, the $11 trillion, you take mortgages out of that, that's still $2.7 trillion in U.S. consumer debt for things like student loans, automobiles, credit cards. So households are still so over indebted. Is adding more debt really going to help the economy? I don't think so, but it's still what we're looking to fuel growth. It's what the Fed, when it does QE, it's hoping that the economy, that consumers feel a little richer because they're trying to help housing, and then they go out and spend. So it's just the same cycle that's perpetuated again and again.
Right. I guess one of the arguments to help wipe out student debt is that these students, middle class, if they no longer have the burden of paying whatever it is, hundreds of dollars a month, they're now going to have that dispensable income to contribute to the economy.
To go spend more money, exactly.
Right. To pump it into the economy. Nastia, really quickly, we don't have a lot of time, but I know the Jubilee, their big event is coming up. What's to look forward to there?
Oh, it's going to be, a really fabulous event this Thursday evening. There's lots of artists, performers. They're really trying to have fun with it. It's a variety show. They're going to be streaming it online, and we'll certainly be there to make sure to bring our viewers exactly what happens that evening and how much money they raise.
All right, looking forward to your coverage there, Anastasia. Thanks to the both of you for weighing in. That was Lauren Lister. She's the host of Capital Account, and RT correspondent Anastasia Turkina.